Welcome. In this lecture, we will introduce real property law. We will explore the key characteristics of property, how property is different from a contract, the main theories explaining why private property exists, what kinds of resources cannot be privately owned, how possession works in law, what personal property includes, and the remedies available to enforce these rights. Understanding these concepts is essential for anyone studying law. Let us begin with the characteristics of property. Private property refers to a particular legal relationship between a person and a resource or object. The legal idea of property is different from the everyday idea. In daily life, we think of owning an object. But in law, property means having certain rights in relation to that object. These rights define how a person can use, control, and protect that resource. A key concept is the bundle of rights. This means that property is made up of various rights bundled together. These usually include the right to possess the object, the right to control it, the right to use it, and the right to exclude others from it. These rights can be separated or shared. For example, one person may own the title but lease the right to possess it to someone else. This idea of fragmentation explains why property can be divided in complex ways. Next, we compare property rights with contract rights. A proprietary interest is a right in rem. It can be enforced against everyone. A contractual interest is in personam. It only applies between the parties to the contract. For example, a license allows a person to use property but does not give them the right to exclude others. In the case of Radach and Smith, the High Court explained that a license gives permission, but not possession. To test if an agreement is a lease or a license, courts look at whether there is exclusive possession and the right to exclude others. In Street and Mountford, even though the agreement called it a license, the court found it was a lease because the occupant could exclude others and had clear possession. Sometimes, parties try to make a license irrevocable through further terms. But the courts often reject this. In Cowell and Rose Hill Racecourse, a racegoer argued that his ticket gave him a proprietary interest. The court held there was no proprietary interest and no suitable proprietary remedy. Mortgages are another example. They create a proprietary interest because they provide security over property. A mortgage is not full ownership but an encumbrance. Loans, however, are purely contractual. Why do we have private property? There are different explanations. John Locke developed the labor theory. He argued that when a person puts labor into land or a resource, they earn the right to own and benefit from it. This encourages people to work the land and keep it productive. Jeremy Bentham developed the utilitarian theory. He believed private property creates the most happiness for society as a whole. Immanuel Kant argued that labor was not always needed. He focused on the human belief in ownership and the role of government in recognizing it fairly. Karl Marx took a different view. He believed property should be shared among the laborers. But critics point out that this system can reduce efficiency and incentives to maintain property. Today, there are more modern views discussed in detail in tutorials. Some well-known thinkers include De Soto, Macpherson, and Fitzpatrick, who add important contemporary perspectives on private property. Some resources are considered incapable of private ownership. The res communes principle means that some things, like the sea, beaches, forests, and running water, should remain outside individual ownership for moral or environmental reasons. Without regulation, there is a risk of the tragedy of the commons, where everyone acts in self-interest and resources are overused. A spectacle or view cannot be owned either. In the Victoria Park racing case, the court confirmed that a view is not property, although tort actions may be possible. Moral boundaries also limit property rights. For example, human life cannot be owned. This is a fundamental human rights principle and is why slavery has been abolished. Although body parts may sometimes be treated as property, they are heavily regulated, especially for organ donations. In international law, the common heritage idea comes from the res communes principle. Resources on the high seas or in outer space must be used in ways that protect the interests of all nations. Possession is a central idea in property law. The finders keepers rule says that when someone finds goods, they gain good title against everyone except the true owner. In Waverley Borough Council and Fletcher, a man found a brooch in a public park using a metal detector. The court held that the brooch belonged to the council because it was underground and attached to the land. The law says if an object is attached to or under land, the owner of the land owns it. If it is loose above the ground, the finder owns it unless the landowner clearly shows they intend to control everything on the land. If a person has possession with the owner's consent, it creates a legal right. A lease is an example for real property. A bailment is an example for personal property. The person given possession has a right, and the owner has a right to take the property back later. When possession is without consent, the possessor can still have rights until the owner reclaims it. If the owner does not reclaim it within a legal time limit, the possessor might gain ownership by adverse possession. In Asher and Whitlock, the court confirmed that a possessor can use and enjoy the property and has a better right than someone who is out of possession. In the past, landowners held seisin, which meant freehold title. Today, seisin has been replaced by the concept of registrable title. Property interests must be perfected through registration. Personal property is also important in this area of law. The Personal Property Securities Act sets the rules for creating and enforcing security interests in personal property. It also explains how to decide which interests have priority when there is more than one claim over the same item. Finally, we look at remedies. For real property, the main remedy is repossession of land. Each Australian state has its own laws for recovering possession. For personal property, remedies are usually based in contract or tort. They may include damages, restitution, or injunctions. These actions protect and enforce rights over personal property. You can review the diagram in Hepburn at paragraph 1.32 for a useful summary. This brings us to the end of our introduction to real property law. Remember the key points about the characteristics of property, the difference between property and contract rights, the main theories about why private property exists, the limits on ownership, how possession works, and how remedies protect these rights. Make sure you know the important cases and examples. This knowledge will help you in tutorials and assessments and give you a strong start for deeper study. Thank you for watching and good luck with your studies.